Hardwick Hall. So, sorry. Hardwick Hall. So it's really important that you look at this podcast, because obviously this is something that will definitely be on your exam. It'll be the essay on the Elizabethan England section. So here goes then. So the title will be something like: the main change that Elizabethan manor houses demonstrated was the greater prosperity of their owners, or the successful career of their owners. So make sure in the exam you read the question, so when you're doing your answer, you're channeling it towards what the question is asking. So you need to make sure that you've written 6 paragraphs for this, and you must try and get an introduction in. So in the introduction, you need to talk about Bess of Hardwick was the second richest woman in England. And in 1590 she built Hardwick Hall in Derbyshire, just next to her childhood home, which was the Old Hall. So she basically went back home to where she was originally from. Her 4 marriages had given her wealth and position to be able to build Hardwick Hall, and she was close to Elizabeth I. And her 4th husband was head of one of the noblest families in England. So she actually became Countess of Shrewsbury, so she's also known as Elizabeth of Shrewsbury. And at one point, he was so trusted by the Queen that they were responsible for guarding Mary, Queen of Scots. Now, this was a bit like a poisoned chalice, because it was very expensive to keep her in the manner that she'd been accustomed to, and also very stressful, as you know, with all the Catholic plots and everything. So in the end, this led to him having really what we'd see today as a nervous breakdown, and him and Bess had to start living apart. But when he died, he did leave his money to Bess of Hardwick. So, the 4 main paragraphs are lonely foxes stalk people. So you need to start writing about location. So, in the location paragraph, you need to be writing these sorts of things. It was built deep in the Derbyshire countryside because of the amount of land around it. It showed a wealth. So, the land around manor houses were all to show prosperity and success of their owners, and that's exactly what Hardwick Hall did. The huge gardens at Hardwick were used for exercise and to impress important guests. And the building was totally symmetrical. So it had straight chimney columns at either side, and if you put a mirror down the centre, you would see exactly the same one side as you did the other, and that was a very fashionable design in those days. The loggia, the open walkway, which was right at the front of the house, this was built really for culture and comfort. So the reason why it was open is it wasn't for defence and protection, because they felt safe out in the countryside. And also it's important that you notice that it's made from Renaissance architecture. So the big pillars are done just like, the Greeks and the Romans had done theirs. And that was, very sought after at that time. The Great Hall was also just as you go in, and this was designed to humble guests with its scale, because obviously as soon as you go in, you start to see a picture of Bess of Hardwick on the wall. You see a coat of arms, just to remind you immediately who owns this. And that was a grand entrance as you went in. So the next paragraph is function and design. So it was an E-shaped floor plan for Elizabeth I in honour of Elizabeth, and this was, common because it used to be for H floor plans when it was Henry VIII and things, but now it's E for Elizabeth. Design was more window than wall, and that's an important phrase to go in, because glass was very expensive in those days, and also she owned her own glassworks. It was fashionable for women of Bess's status to have a manor house because it showed the wealth and success. So it was important that you had a house like that if you could have. And also remember, she's trying to show status as the second richest woman in England. And it's unbelievable that somebody who is just a woman has managed to rise to this sort of status. Especially bearing in mind she'd just been part of the gentry before. She then managed to marry herself with a few marriages into the nobility. The tapestries were all round the house, and they had like the Tobit tapestry and the Gideon tapestries, remember to say a couple of those, and they were all designed to celebrate a success basically. That's what it was all about. And it showed you wealth. If you had the money to be able to put tapestries on the wall, then it showed you were richer. Plain walls meant that you were poorer. And in one sitting, she actually spent £40,000 on tapestries when she went to London once. The High Great Chamber, this was to greet noble guests, and it was an exact replica of Elizabeth's, throne rooms in her palaces. So that shows just how important Bess thought she was. She was second only to Queen Elizabeth I in England, so that was significant. And in the High Great Chamber, there were what we would see as carpets today, but in those days they were called rushed matting. And there was also rush matting in 5 other rooms in Hardwick Hall, and they were just put in the best rooms, because that obviously was to show, the wealth that she had. It wasn't all around the house, but it was in her most important rooms. So again, if you were, rich enough to have carpets on the floor, then you were doing extremely well. The lattice windows were important, so they had to be done in a lattice shape because they couldn't afford massive panes of glass in those days. They couldn't make them in massive panes of glass, so the windows were lattice windows. And the house reflects completely the great chain of being. So the servants would be at the bottom, right up to going up to the nobility at the top, in the top rooms. And if she had a family round, then she'd often just meet them on the middle floor, okay, because they would obviously have been seen. Yes, now it's nobility, but before there would have been the gentry, so she used to just meet them. It was more comfortable to meet them on the middle floor. The structure paragraph. Hardwick Hall was designed by Robert Smithson, okay, and he was the leading architect of the time. But many ideas for Hardwick Hall came from Bess, and she had ES for Elizabeth of Shrewsbury, a full title, in no less than 14 places on the parapets at the top of the house. The manor houses were absolutely to show prosperity of their owners. This is the reason she had it built. And she had it built on high land in Derbyshire, so everyone could see for miles around just how well she'd done. The huge staircases basically started to show the scale and length of the house, and also the staircases had to be that big because when they had the big dresses they needed to walk up in pairs and talk, so they needed big staircases for that to be able to happen. Now the long gallery is extremely important. It was 166 foot long, and it was used for exercise after they'd been eating the meals and things, because often the weather wasn't good enough to go out in the gardens. And in the long gallery there was portraits demonstrating the connections that she had. So they had pictures of Mary Stuart, who was Mary Queen of Scots, up there, pictures of Elizabeth I up there, a granddaughter, Arbella, who was obviously someone who could be the heir to the throne, and all of her powerful friends and nobles and things. So it was to show how well connected she was, and there's no coincidence that was there in the long gallery. Now Arbella, a granddaughter, we'll come to this more in the next paragraph, could have been the possible heir after Elizabeth I. And the cut velvet bedrooms that she had in her house were to show how wealthy she was, because these would have been the equivalent to like £1 million roughly today, each of these bedrooms. And the cut velvet was done to match the duvets and the curtains and the stools and things like that. And it was very, very expensive material, velvet, in those days, so only your most important guests would stay in the cut velvet bedrooms. Okay, final paragraph then. People connected with Hardwick Hall. So Bess of Hardwick was a significant figure in Elizabethan England, and her granddaughter Arbella, or James VI of Scotland, would take the throne. Arbella lived at Hardwick, but Bess really kept her almost like a prisoner, because Bess wanted to make sure that there was no stains on her reputation or anything, because she would have liked her to become queen. And it did look like for a long time that she would pick Arbella, because she even said, Elizabeth, to a lot of the ambassadors and things, look well on Arbella, for she will be like I am now. So the idea is that she would be just like I am, now, so she will be queen. So a lot of the ambassadors were talking about in other countries that Arbella would be named as a successor. Now also in the house there's a Protestant chapel, okay, and it's obviously very plain, and this would please Elizabeth I because she was a Protestant. So if Bess Hardwick had been Catholic, then she could have had that property taken from her. Also, places like the High Great Chamber were a mirror image of Elizabeth's palaces, so it obviously shows that she was just the second most important person to Elizabeth I. And there was constant reminders all around the house. So the coat of arms was all around the Great Hall. It's all around loads of different rooms. In the room that's the High Great Chamber, she's also got the coat of arms of Elizabeth I upon the wall to pay homage to her, because obviously she would like a granddaughter to be the next heir, so she wants to show loyalty to her. And there's decorative stonework everywhere in the fashionable Italian design. So everything in this house absolutely is showing you her wealth and prosperity. So finally, the conclusion. Well, you can't really balance the conclusion out in this one at all, because it is what the title is asking. So one of the main reasons that manor houses were built was to show the greater prosperity of their owners, and Hardwick Hall supports this, and Bess used the wealth from her marriages to achieve this. So it was all about, a successful career was the marriages and things that she'd made, and she used it to show her wealth and prosperity. The location in the countryside and high up on the hill obviously highlights this, and it was fashionable to live away from others, and obviously the amount of land that she had around showed how rich she was. And the rooms like the Long Gallery and the High Great Chamber absolutely show that she is only second to Elizabeth I. So in terms of that, those leave you in absolutely no doubt how important she is. The Long Gallery is significant because it obviously shows all the connections and things that she had, and you know how well connected she was, you know, and how noble she was and everything. And also the loggia, so the Renaissance architecture that you see at the front, the open walkway, absolutely shows any guest that she's rich enough to be able to have the Renaissance architecture. And also, finally, more window than wall must go in there. And if you want to say more glass than wall, that's fine. But the idea is glass was a really expensive material in those days. And the idea that she could actually make a house out of that suggested that she was really, really a woman to be reckoned with. And she certainly had managed to build up a reputation as a formidable woman, second only to Elizabeth I in Elizabethan England.